And so then this brings up our definition 2 of defining real. Sex differences are real if they are observed in all or most contemporary cultures. All right, so here's the thing. If there are gender differences that are observed around the world and throughout history, we would have compelling reason to believe it is real, because that means that men and women, regardless of where they're raised or what time period they are living in, if they're exhibiting this difference in behavior, that, it probably isn't, it's probably less likely to be a learned difference, because those societies would be so different, right? That couldn't be the answer. And so when we turn to definition 2, it's like, okay, how do we answer that? Well, one problem that we have when it comes to answering that, like, are there differences that exist throughout history and across different cultures? One issue that we have here, as your book points out, is because there's a gap in the research. Most of our studies, particularly most of our studies pre-1990s, they focused on what your book called weird. And by weird, I don't mean like odd or strange. I mean weird as in the acronym. And the acronym WEIRD stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic, right? So a lot of our studies have been in those countries, although it's worth noting that, only about 12% of the world's population fits that definition, right? So we almost can't even address this definition because there is a huge gap in the research. But to the extent that we have looked at multiple, countries and differences, what is the finding? Well, in this section, your book talks about the math ability. So, there is, and I referenced it, just a couple of minutes ago. There is this stereotype, and it's not a stereotype. It is supported in the United States, that men are better at math than women, and we see these disparities in skill emerging in middle school, high school. Boys score higher than girls do on the quantitative section of the SAT, and like math integrates test. And so, and so this belief, right? Women are just less likely to be good in math. I mean, this belief is so commonplace that, as your book pointed out, in 1992, when Barbie put out a Teen Talk Barbie, one of the phrases that she said was math class is tough. And so, that isn't just random, right? It really reflected this idea. Oh yes, for a lot of teen girls, math is tough. They don't like math. So is this true across other countries? What does the data suggest? So when we are looking at math ability, what does the data suggest? Well, first of all, if we look at it cross-nationally, meaning we look at it with other countries, you can see that while men do have higher scores in math than women in a lot of countries, that is not universally true. There are some countries where women on average score much higher than men. The Czech Republic kind of stands out there. And where else are we looking? I felt like there was another country that I wanted to point out. And then, so not just like the Czech Republic, but even among like some of the European countries, Iceland, the United Kingdom, they mentioned Thailand. And so then if you compare, between countries, then it becomes even more complicated, or, less gendered, in the sense that, okay, in Japan, men outscore women, but Japanese girls outscore American boys. So it becomes not a clear sex difference. Historically, it also isn't a very stable difference, because when we look at test results over time, in the last 20 years, especially as we've started to push STEM and push young women to consider STEM careers, we've seen the gap between male and female test scores dramatically narrow in the United States. No, not disappear, but dramatically narrow. And then finally, your book says, the other kind of thing to consider is, what are we using as a measurement? So I've been talking a lot about standardized tests, but if you turn to grades, oftentimes, regardless of standardized test data, girls get higher grades in high school and college in their math classes. So this goes back to that other issue, right, with measuring difference, because how we measure is also very important. And so what they find is that the best predictor of math ability is actually beliefs around math ability and sex. That the gap between male and female, math ability is smallest in the countries where culturally they don't have the message that women are bad at math, versus cultures that do have that belief, that do support that belief. That's where the gap seems to be the highest. And so in that way, this sex difference, this just shows you, that even something that looks pretty consistent in our own country right now at a given time period becomes a little bit more complicated when you consider other time periods and other cultures. And so that's the point that they end that section with. When observed sex differences show variation over time and across cultures, it suggests that they are not inevitable and universal. When we see less variation, assuming they are real is more plausible. When sex differences resist cultural influence, it might be a hint that they are not just related to gendered stereotypes and opportunities, but may be part of being biologically human.